few days. Since this is just basically a broadcast, the chat function is disabled. However, we still want your feedback on this presentation and any other questions. So you can email pacificpoint@gsa.gov for questions related to GSA's presentation and our invitation for bid. And after you hear the city's presentation by Mr. Tate, you could also email him at jtate@auburnwashington.gov. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the project manager, Anita Lee, and she'll go over the property overview. Take it away, Anita.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. My name is Anita Lee, the project manager from GSA to handle this sales. And today we have a couple of things that we would like to share with you from GSA and also from City of Auburn. So first of all, we are going to give you some property overview, and then we will turn over to the city and they will give you a little information about the development approaches. And then it will come back to GSA, and I'm going to give you more detail about the reservation, about this sales. First, let me give you some basic information about this site. This property is located at 415th Street Southwest in the city of Auburn, King County, Washington, approximately 25 miles south of Seattle and 13 miles northeast of Tacoma. Pacific Point consists around approximately 129 acres, has 15 structures. It has some warehouse, childcare center, and office building. It has over 1.5 million square feet. It was originally part of the U.S. Army's supply depot and got transferred to GSA in 1962. Now let's take a look at our sales schedule. The soft close has been set on February 16, 2022. In order for the auction to close, the highest bid has to survive the 24 hours challenge. When the auctions close, within 5 business days, GSA will send out the acceptance letter unless it's rejected. And within the 3 business days after the highest bidder received the award letter, they have to submit the 10% earnest money. And the sales has to close in 90 days. And the reservation period will start and it will end April 30th, 2024, which is around 24 months after the sales. We will provide you more information about the reservation, but now let's turn the screen to City of Auburn, and please give a warm welcome to Mr. Jeff Tate, the Director of the Community Development Department. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, thank you, Anita. We're going to run through probably 7 or 8 slides here just to talk a little bit about what a future development process would look like. And there's a couple paths that I'm going to talk about. First of all, just wanted to mention a few things about the site with respect to how the city designates the site and what we know about the site. So first of all, the city has a comprehensive plan which identifies future land use designations. This site is designated as heavy commercial. And what that means for the zoning designation is that it's C3 heavy commercial. I'll talk a little bit about what that zone is and what uses are allowed in that zone as city code is currently written in a moment. But in evaluating or looking at the site, the city maps out different types of features that could be on the site. And I thought it was important to note that we don't see any wetlands on the site, streams, geologically hazardous areas, floodplains, things of that nature. no historic designations, formal designations. I think those are important features to highlight because all of those types of things do add other layers of complexity to developing a site. And they also establish areas that might be required to be set aside. Like if there was a wetland there that, that portion of the property may not be developed. So from this perspective, the site is not encumbered by any of those features. I do think that it's worthwhile pointing out that the city of Auburn right now operates under the 2018 International Building Codes. And right now, under state law, there is an anticipated update to that code. And that's not unique to Auburn, but it would be applied to all of Washington state where the next, I think it's the 2021 ICC would go into effect on July 1st, 2023. So important, I think, when thinking about building codes and what codes apply to know that that transition is ahead of us as well. Anita, can you go to the next slide, please? So a little bit about the C3 zone, the heavy commercial zone. So we're going to talk about entitlements here. So first of all, our city code lists out permitted uses, administrative uses, conditional uses, and prohibited uses. So I've cited the code section here. If folks want to jump into our website and look at this section of code, because you'll see the range of permitted uses, which are those entitled uses subject to building permit, their administrative processes, things of that nature. An administrative use permit is kind of, it's an entitled use as well, but it adds some additional criteria in order to receive approval. Conditional uses are tougher permit process to go through. Those are staff recommendations that are made to the city's hearing examiner. And then there's a list of prohibited uses. And we'll talk a little bit about warehousing and distribution because I think that this site has generated a lot of interest from potential buyers or owners who would be interested in establishing logistics type activities on the property. And you'll see right there that that's a prohibited use. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the basic development standards within the C3 zone, street setbacks, fairly small for a site of this size, 20 feet. Property setbacks to the west and south, there's no setback. The building height limit is 75 feet. There's not a building lot coverage restriction. So sometimes you'll see 75% of the site can be covered with buildings, but the other 25% can't be. So that standard doesn't exist here. And then minimum lot width, size, and depth. There aren't any standards related to that. And that's just in case someone had interest in dividing the property into, multiple lots and selling some of those lots while building other lots. So there aren't those size restrictions that are established in that zone. Anita, can you go to the next slide, please? Entitlement process. I'm probably telling a lot of you what you already know. There are pros and cons. Obviously, the pros in an entitlement process is the predictability that it establishes. You know what that list of allowed uses are when you acquire the property. You end up having an ability to design in a way that it limits your exposure to kind of a public process. And I know some developers are interested in, taking that kind of risk or timeline out of the equation. You avoid uncertain political outcomes because it's not decision making at a city council level or mayor level or a planning commission level. It is working with city staff at an administrative level, which also leads to streamlined permitting processes. Obviously big buildings and big sites take longer to get permits than small sites with small buildings, but because it's an administrative process, it's fairly easy to sketch out what those timelines look like. The cons of an entitlement, going by what the city code, the city zoning code says, is there's not a lot of flexibility or discretion to consider good ideas outside of that C3 zoning designation. And I think like with a 129 acre piece of property, there's a lot of good ideas that that could exist out there. And, any zoning designation is intended to provide the same set of standards everywhere, no matter what the size of the property is, no matter where it's at in the city. So it works for the most part in most instances, but a site like this, that existing adopted city code could preclude a good idea. So I think that covers kind of both of those bullet points. So Anita, next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about a development agreement. So this is option number 2. Development agreements are negotiated agreements between a city and a property owner. So it allows us to sit at the table and talk about other ideas that are outside what the city code says. Under a development agreement, I've listed the Washington state law where that is authorized. It allows us to establish uses and standards that are appropriate for the site. The concepts are developed by the owner. We review those. We make recommendations, so we go back and forth a little bit. Ultimately, that development agreement, though, does get to the city council for action. It's subject to environmental review because it's stepping outside of current zoning. I've indicated what that process would likely entail in terms of time frame, just based upon other development agreements that have been worked out. In the end, the easiest way, I think many of you are probably familiar with development agreements, but you get more than what the city code allows, and the city gets more than what we typically would ask of a developer. So hopefully that turns into a win-win, and the city has strong interest in sitting down and developing concepts that would work for this site that are outside of what adopted city code is. We want to see a successful outcome at this site. So I've indicated here some of the concepts and things that can be articulated in a development agreement, like uses and density, alternative impact fee arrangements or amounts, amenities or parks and open space that might be established, establishing permit review processes and phasing plans. But it wouldn't cover wetlands and streams, stormwater management, utilities, and shorelines. Those are governed under different standards. And when I see that list, I think that, wetland streams and shorelines are non-issues, but we can't deviate from the state's stormwater management requirements in a development agreement. So that becomes kind of a no-go area for talking through. And then utility infrastructure is we can talk about that in a development agreement, but and really probably more with respect to phasing and who's building what, whether it's a public improvement or a private improvement. Next slide, please. Pros and cons to a development agreement. To me, the biggest benefit is flexibility. Big projects like this benefit from flexibility. It allows us to customize standards for the site. We can sit and negotiate in good faith on mutually beneficial outcomes. And you have greater ability to put the money that you would normally pay us in impact fees. You have greater ability to put that in the ground instead of paying the city. It does create an opportunity for the legislative body, obviously, to get involved. And some people see that as a good thing. Some people see that as another layer or a chance of, there being political outcomes. And I do think that our city council in Auburn is, well, compared to other cities I've worked in, I think where politics has entered a lot of decision making, I think that this city council has strong interest in, achieving really positive outcomes for this piece of property. They want to see it developed. They want to see it reused. So there's not like a no growth perspective from our city council. I guess that's important to say. And there's that additional time up front, so if I say that it's going to take 12 to 24 months to get through a development agreement, obviously time matters. But in the long run, the development agreements that we've entered into it in the city of Auburn typically have like 15-year timeframes associated with it. So, it really provides certainty even when codes are changing and political administrations are changing. It gives you certainty that you're still protected under that development agreement for the future. Next slide, please. This is really the last slide, and I want to emphasize that this is an example. So the numbers that you see on this screen are provided, and as well as the list of uses for illustrative purposes. So we're not presenting this slide to say that this has to be the mix, but what you'll see in here is a concept that seeks to achieve an outcome that's outside of the city code. So the C3 zoning. So I think one thing that I guess I would highlight right here is, since I know many of you who are on this call are interested in the site for potential logistics operations, the city's open to that, but we need to, that would have to be done through a development agreement since it's not allowed under city code. And, I think that we'd be looking at probably that purplish area, the southern part of the property, which abuts Boeing to the west, and well, there's a fire station just to the south, but right past the fire station is a significant Safeway distribution facility. So we understand that this is an area that makes sense for some logistics. But we also think as you go north and you get to the intersection of 15th and C Street, where we have the GSA office facility, 15th Street and the northern extent off of that, you can't see on the screen, but you get into more retail activity, you get into hospitality. We think that there's opportunity there, and we think that it's really important for us to ensure that on that northern half of the property, we're taking advantage of kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity for the city as the federal government seeks to auction the property. And then I think the last 2 points that I would make before turning it back over to Anita is that first of all, just for awareness, just down the street on 15th is the Outlook Collection. It's a large mall, and as many malls are doing these days, they're sort of changing their sort of portfolio of tenants. And it's we had a Sam's Club there that has since been converted to something called Fieldhouse USA. It's an indoor sporting complex that's part of the mall now, which is newer, a couple of years that it's been there, but COVID has sort of impacted its operations. But now that it's getting running a little bit more the way that their business plan had modeled, there's an anticipated 2.2 million visitors per year at Fieldhouse USA. Folks who are visiting Fieldhouse USA are coming in for 2, 3, and 4 days for sporting events and staying. They have hotel needs, they have restaurant needs, they have entertainment needs, and we don't have the ability to serve those needs today because those hospitality and commercial opportunities or the existing network of businesses won't support that kind of visitor, those kind of visitor numbers. So what that means right now is we are sending people who come to Fieldhouse USA to other cities outside Auburn, our nearby cities, to stay in hotels and eat at restaurants. So we believe firmly that there's opportunity here for this site. And then the last point that I'll make is when thinking about development agreements, I know the natural question is going to be like, well, is it 40% warehousing? Is it 50? Is it 20? What is the city going to allow? And I know this will be challenging right now when thinking about acquisition of this property, but I don't think we want to provide any sort of number because we want to entertain good ideas and ideas that are mutually beneficial. So I just would say that when we think of good ideas for the northern part of this property, we're going to put those good ideas into 2 categories. One is economic performance, and the other is social contribution. So economic performance, I'll just rattle off a few bullet points for what we think that means. One is jobs, job density, what wages are, job type. That's one way of looking at economic performance. Tax generation, sales tax, property tax, business and occupation tax, how uses might help recirculate dollars within our community and support buy local type of efforts. And buy local isn't just about, an Auburn resident going to a restaurant and that's in Auburn and spending their money in Auburn, but it also has to do with supply chain. And Auburn has a robust network of different types of businesses. So we'd want to, that would be one way of looking at economic performance. Ways to import dollars from outside Auburn into Auburn. And, that could be in the form of tourism. How do we support those objectives? And then positive impact on local small businesses in our community. So to me, there's lots of ways to look at economic performance, and those are just some categories of how we would be open to a conversation. And it doesn't have to hit every bullet point, but so some bullet points are probably more attractive than other bullet points to depending upon who the buyer is. And then social contribution is what kinds of public amenities can be included in redevelopment of a site, whether that's trails or parks or athletic fields or something like that. How to seek a contribution to healthier lifestyles, whether that's food, exercise, mental health, how to incorporate renewable energy or greenhouse gas reduction, how to contribute to reductions in traffic, how to participate in the delivery of human services within our community, how to contribute to the local arts, whether that's artist space or artist lofts or venues for the arts. And then there's supplemental financial arrangement to help with road funding. That's really our opposition or resistance to warehousing and logistics really comes down to the fact that, a number of years ago, the Washington State Legislature shifted the way a sales tax is distributed to point of sale rather than point of origin. We didn't like that change. We lobbied against it. We lost that lobbying effort. And areas like Auburn and other valley cities around Auburn were disadvantaged by that decision. And that disadvantage is now projecting into our local communities on how we look at warehousing and distribution. We know that type of business, that economic sector is crucial, especially where we lie in between Seattle and Tacoma. And the valley that Auburn lies in is the fourth largest distribution center in the country. We don't like taking a resistive stance on warehousing and logistics, but warehousing and logistics is expensive to the city. It produces fairly low job performance, and it produces high impact on our road system. So we know our identity. We know that we have a robust logistics economic sector in our community. We embrace those who are in place here, who have established their businesses here. It's hard to accept new warehousing and logistic uses. So that's why I say on that last bullet point, supplemental financial arrangements. So since we don't typically generate much in terms of tax revenue, since most property tax doesn't come to the city. So that's an important factor for us as well. Thank you, Anita, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, for providing us the overview of the development approaches. It is very helpful for our customer. And in the next few slides, we are going to talk about the reservation and the changes in the new revised IFB. The original invitation for bid IFB, we state that GSA will reserve the entire site for federal use for 30 months. And GSA will remain responsible for the site. And on January 10, we published the new revised IFB. And right in here, we highlight some of the biggest changes. We changed the reservation to 24 months. And also we'll give the new buyers the option for partial federal use reservation. And again, this is just give you some highlight, and you can find all the detail in our new revised IFB on page 3 to 5. It covers the most detail. So let's talk about the partial reservation. We provide these options based on the agency move-out schedule. Right after closing, the southern side of the site will be available. And we have to reserve the federal government need to reserve the northern part, which is the administration building, daycare center, and the building 7. The buyer has the option to take possession of a portion of the property upon closing if the buyer and the government agree on the requirement listed in the next few slides. The first one, it's the utility. There's some work has to be done in this area. On this slide, we just give you some highlight of something that you have to think about as a buyer. And again, all the detail you will be find in our IFB. Besides the utility, there's also the fire protection system. It may change your option. The fire protection fire control panel is located in the warehouse 5. So it depends on the new buyers what option that they select. We do have 2 options. Option number 1, the federal government will reserve the right for warehouse number 5 and maintain the system for the entire site. In this pictures, it indicates the difference between option 1 and option 2. Again, option 1, right after the sales, GSA will reserve this entire area, including warehouse number 5, and continue controlling the fire protection system. The buyers do have this option number 2 that they can go for. They can take possession of number 5. Either they will maintain the fire protection system or will give access to the GSA staff to control and maintain the control panel located in warehouse number 5. Please note, GSA is currently have a service and maintenance contract in place for the fire control system. And if the buyers would like to use this same service, they will take a portion of the cost, the annual cost for this contract. At the end, the successful buyers need to come up with agreement with the federal government about this partial reservation. The successful bidder has to come up with a decision within 10 days after the award, that if they want to go for this partial reservation or not. And within the 90 days of our closing period, the federal government and the new buyers have to come up with an agreement to memorize all the detail about this arrangement. And again, this arrangement and agreement won't affect the sales price. If somehow an agreement is not reached, the federal government will reserve the entire site for 20 months after the closing. Thank you so much for attending our online event today. And I believe you may have some questions afterward. So feel free to send us an email. If you have any specific question about for GSA, you can send it to pacificpoint@gsa.gov. Also, you can email both party, the GSA and the city. Here's Jeff's email, so feel free to send us both the same email, or if you have like particular or any special question that you want to contact city, feel free to contact Jeff. And here's the website. You can get more information about our sales, and this is our auction site that you can, if you want, if you're interested to participate on the sales. Again, my name is Anita, and feel free to give me a call at any time if you have any question. Again, thank you for joining us today. Jeff and David, do you have anything that you would like to add?
If I could add one detail, I know that there's a few folks that are on this webinar who have emailed me in the last few days, and I have not yet responded. So feel free to kind of resend that and get it to the top of my inbox. There's been a lot of interest, so I apologize for those folks who I have yet to respond to. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that please send or resend or anything like that, and I'll be happy to respond.
And I'd like to thank you, Anita. Thank you, Jeff. And thanks to the city of Auburn for participating. We are partners in this process. Although we're the sellers and want to move out of the property, we have other locations. We know that this property means a lot to the city of Auburn, and we hopefully this presentation will help clarify some things in potential interested parties' minds. And as Anita said, the auction is ongoing with a close date of February 16th. So we welcome your questions and participation in the auction. So thank you very much for your time today.
Goodbye.